Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back. Today we'll take in a look at a game played between Magnus Carlsen and Jeffery Xiong from the Clutch Invitational Tournament. This is the last round game, and the scoring system for this tournament is special indeed. So Magnus entered the last round with a 1-point lead. However, the final game is worth 3 points. So if Jeffery were to win, he would knock Magnus out and move on to the next round. However, Magnus only needs a draw, or of course a win, to knock Jeffery out and move on to the next round. If you like these videos, be sure to hit that subscribe and also drop a like on the video below. All right, so let's get started. And as we see, we have a Sicilian on the board. Magnus played e4, Jeffery played c5. Magnus replied with knight f3, and Jeffery played e6. Magnus played c3. Say, hey, let's play some Alapin. I am already up a point. I only need a draw. So let's navigate the position into more quieter position in which I could make a draw much more easy. Jeffery played knight f6. Magnus replied with e5. We have knight d5, and Magnus played bishop c4. Jeffery reroutes a knight to b6 to hit the bishop. Magnus plays bishop b3, and Jeffery plays d6. Magnus replies with d4, and Jeffery played c takes d4, c takes d4, d takes e5, and knight takes e5. And then Jeffery played knight c6, and Magnus replied knight takes c6, b takes c6, and castled. Okay, Jeffery then played bishop e7, Magnus played knight c3. So both players are completing their development, getting their kings to safety, and then they will fight in the middle game. Jeffery castled, and Magnus played queen f3. All right, a important point to note, of course, this bishop is hitting the pawn and c6, but also the black queen is hitting the pawn and e4. But in this particular position, slightly to be preferred is bishop f4. And as we'll see in the game, Jeffery still played bishop a6. So let's say he went bishop a6 still. There is the idea of rook e1, queen d7 to apply more pressure to the d4 pawn. Magnus could play rook f3, and if bishop f6, he could go queen h5. Now the idea behind this move is that the rook will be routed to h3, the bishop on b2 would be routed to c2 to put more pressure on the king. The knight could go to e4, and all the pieces for white are aiming directly at the king. But Magnus, only needing a draw, decided that, hey, I don't need to play like that. Simple chess will do today. So Magnus went queen f3, and Jeffery went bishop a6, hitting the rook and f1. Magnus followed up with rook d1, just protecting the pawn, and d4. And Jeffery brings his knight to the center. Magnus went knight e4. We had queen b6, connecting rook and fully completing development. Magnus went queen g3, applying some pressure on e7. In some lines, he could try bishop h6 to try and win the exchange or to deliver checkmate. Jeffery went queen b8, offering a queen trade, but first Magnus goes bishop g5. We have f6 by Jeffery, trying to keep as much pieces on the board as possible. Magnus went to d2 with the bishop, and Jeffery took on g3. And here Magnus captured towards the center, which is normally the best way to recapture. And Jeffery went bishop d3, just hitting the knight on e4. Magnus rerouted the knight to c3, and Jeffery went rook f8. Magnus played rook a c1. Now bear in mind, even in this position, Jeffery needs to find a way to either complicate things or set white some problems, because he is playing for one result only. He's playing for a win. So he brings his king closer to the center. We have knight a4 aiming for c5 and bishop to c5. Knight goes into c5, bishop takes c5, and now we have rook takes c5. Now if you look at this position, white has the bishop here. He has good control over the c file. He can double rooks, he can push the a pawn, he can create more problems for black. So in this position, white is definitely much better. And Jeffery being in a situation that he needs to play for a win, he might need to take some drastic measures, but let's see what happens. He played knight b6, and we have rook e1, and Jeffery went rook e8, just protecting the pawn on e6 that was under attack. And now we have a very nice idea from Magnus, rook a1, to push the a pawn down the board. Jeffery went rook e d8, hitting the pawn on d4, but this might already be a losing move for black. Much better was to play rook a to c8, just to add some defense to the pawn on c6. White is still to be preferred, but black could hope for a miracle further down in the board, further down in the game. So backtracking just a bit. So rook e d8, and Magnus strike with a4, hitting the bishop on b5, and Jeffery went bishop c4. Now this move gives white the opportunity to win the game on the spot, so you can definitely take a second to think about that one. However, the move Magnus played, which is the strongest move, is bishop takes c4. Jeffery played rook takes d4, hitting the bishop on c4 and also the bishop on d2, but it is not enough. Magnus went a5, hitting the knight on b6, and Jeffery went rook takes c4, hoping for rook takes c4, knight takes c4, and he would be fine. In fact, he would be up a pawn, but Magnus played a times b6, and it was in this position that Jeffery resigned. Point being, if rook takes c5, Magnus would reply with rook takes a7. He is forced to take the rook, and b takes a7, and the pawn will queen on the next move, which is unstoppable. All right, guys, so it was a quick one. Jeffery needed to play for a win. The position did not offer him many chances, but he still had to find a way to fight. So thanks again, guys, for watching, and be sure to hit subscribe and to drop a like on the video, and we will catch you guys in the next one. Peace.